The morning was quiet, almost too quiet, until the thunderous crash shattered the calm. Mark jumped from his chair as the screech of tires and the deafening bang echoed through the house. Emily screamed from the kitchen, "The garage!" And, in that instant, Mark knew something was terribly wrong. Their peaceful suburban life had just been invaded. Mark ran outside, his heart pounding. The sight froze him. A black SUV had rammed straight into their garage door, the twisted metal groaning in protest. A man in a cheap suit stepped out, holding a clipboard, his smug grin sending chills down Mark's spine. "We're from the HOA," the stranger said casually, as if destroying someone's property was just part of his job, but Mark knew better. They didn't even live in an HOA neighborhood, and yet here this man was, acting like he owned the place. Neighbors started, peeking through their windows, whispers spreading like wildfire down the street. Emily clutched her pregnant belly, fear etched on her face, while Mark stood frozen, a storm of confusion and anger building inside him. What they didn't know was that someone else had heard the crash too. Upstairs, 13-year-old Alex put down his video game controller, his young face hardening with a strange mix of fear and determination. What came next would leave the entire neighborhood talking for years. Mark tried to keep his voice steady. "Who are you? What do you want?" The suited man smirked, flipping through his clipboard like a game show host. "Your property violates HOA regulations," he said smoothly, "and we're here to enforce compliance." Behind him, two more. Men in matching polo shirts leaned against the SUV, arms crossed, watching silently. Emily stepped closer, her voice shaking. "This is not an HOA neighborhood. You have no authority here." The man tilted his head, that same smug grin never leaving his face. "Ma'am, you'll want to calm down. This is just business. You'll thank us later." Neighbors started to gather quietly on their lawns, filming with their phones, unsure of what they were witnessing. Mark clenched his fists, but said nothing. He wasn't going to let his temper make things worse, especially not with Emily, standing right there. Then came the sound that turned every head on the block, the heavy metallic click of a door upstairs. Alex had opened the window of his room, his small frame clad in his father's old tactical vest, and in his hands, unmistakably, was his father's vintage, deactivated AK-74. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily's voice broke. "Alex, no!" But the boy's young face was serious, his voice steady as he called down to the strangers below. "Leave my family alone." For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The strangers by the SUV stiffened, suddenly unsure of themselves. Neighbors clutched their children, some filming, some whispering. Even Mark was frozen, torn between fear and a strange surge of pride. His son, his quiet, bookish 13-year-old, was standing there like a protector, his small hands gripping the vintage rifle that hadn't worked in years. "Son," Mark said softly, keeping his eyes on Alex. "Put it down. It's okay. I've got this." But Alex didn't move. His voice was clear, almost too calm for his age. "No, Dad. They scared Mom. They hurt our home. I'm not letting them hurt you, too." The suited man's smirk faltered. For the first time, he looked unsure. He muttered something to the men near the SUV, but they stayed still, glancing nervously at the crowd that was growing by the second. The tension was electric, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Emily's hand gripped Mark's arm. "Do something," she whispered, tears in her eyes. But Mark didn't rush. He took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and stepped forward. "You have 30 seconds, he said, his voice low but sharp, "to get off my property before I make a single phone call that changes your life forever." The man with the clipboard opened his mouth to argue, but before he could speak, a familiar black and white cruiser turned the corner. Someone had called the police. Sirens wailed in the distance as neighbors stepped back, clearing the street, like an audience making way for the final act. The strangers panicked. One of the men jumped into the SUV while the other whispered frantically to the suited leader. Mark didn't flinch. He just stood there, his arm wrapped around Emily, while his son, still at the window, refused to move. The police cruiser stopped, and two officers stepped out, hands on their belts, scanning the chaotic scene. One officer raised a calming hand. "Sir," he said to Mark, "what's going on here?" Mark didn't hesitate. "These men rammed into my garage, threatened my family, and claimed they're from an HOA that doesn't exist." The officer's eyes hardened as he turned to the strangers. "IDs, now." The men stuttered, fumbling for explanations, their false confidence crumbling. Emily exhaled shakily, her body finally relaxing as Mark whispered up to Alex, "It's okay, son. We're safe now. Come downstairs." And for the first time since the crash, Alex lowered the old, harmless rifle and disappeared from the window. The investigation moved quickly. The police handcuffed the strangers while neighbors watched in stunned silence. It turned out the so-called HOA agents were part of a scam ring targeting homeowners in quiet neighborhoods, pretending to enforce regulations to intimidate families into paying fake fines. Mark felt a mix of relief and anger as the officers explained it all. "We've been after these guys for months," one officer said, "but we never had proof until now." Emily sat on the porch, tears streaking her cheeks, one hand protectively on her stomach. Alex sat beside her, his small shoulders slumped, as if the weight of the morning had finally hit him. Mark knelt down in front of him, resting a hand on his son's knee. "You were brave," he said softly. "But next time, let me handle it, okay?" Alex nodded slowly, but his eyes betrayed a spark of quiet pride. Around them, neighbors began clapping softly, murmuring words of support and gratitude. For the first time that day, the street felt safe again. By evening, the story had spread far beyond the neighborhood. Local news crews arrived, cameras flashing, microphones waving, headlines read, "Fake HOA, scam foiled, brave teen helps save family." Mark didn't care about the attention. All that mattered was that his family was safe, and the people who had tried to scare them were gone. Still, he couldn't help but feel a deep gratitude for his son's courage, even if it had scared him half to death. Emily, sitting on the porch with Alex, smiled weakly as neighbors dropped by with cookies and casseroles, little gestures of kindness that meant everything. "You're our hero, Alex," one woman said, ruffling his hair. The boy blushed, mumbling that he just wanted to protect his mom. That night, when the house was finally quiet again, Mark stood in the garage, staring at the dented door. It would take weeks to fix, but he didn't mind. The damage was a reminder of danger, yes, but also of love, bravery, and the strength of a family that refused to be broken. Weeks later, the neighborhood had returned to its usual calm. The garage door was repaired, the lawn was green, and laughter once again filled the air. But something had changed in the family. Something deeper, stronger. Mark watched Alex mowing the lawn one Saturday morning, a quiet smile on his face. His boy wasn't just a kid anymore. He was someone who had stared fear in the face and stood his ground. Emily joined him on the porch, her hand slipping into his. "We're lucky," she whispered, her eyes on their son. Mark nodded. "No," he said softly, "we're blessed." The fake HOA scam had shaken their world, but it had also reminded them of what truly mattered: family, courage, and the unspoken bond that tied them together. And though the headlines faded and the world moved on, the lesson remained. Home isn't just a place. It's the people who will fight, in their own way, to protect it. And for Mark, Emily, and Alex, that quiet victory was more powerful than anything that SUV could ever destroy.